I speak truth to power without fear. So this video right here is a video that deals with this meeting that Joe Biden had with civil rights leaders. And also it is a response to a couple of videos that I saw where people were basically suggesting that Joe Biden said he's not doing anything for black people or for these civil rights organizations. You have a couple of people who have completely distorted what happened during that meeting. They have taken little sound bites from that meeting and completely distorted what was being said at that meeting. And I just want to take some time to respond to a lot of these things that people have said. You know, I saw two videos again. The first one was by this YouTuber by the name of Black Conservative Perspective. I will post a link to his video in the description box. I will also post the link to the actual video where the actual meeting was videotaped between these black civil rights leaders and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So you can watch the entire thing for yourself. It's about an hour and 40 minutes. You know, don't just listen to these talking heads try to interpret stuff for you. Just listen to it for yourself and judge it for yourself. So what I'm going to do is just do a brief synopsis of some of the things that were said and just respond to these false and distorted things that have been put out here. You know, a lot of people are suggesting that they told us all along that Joe Biden didn't care nothing about black people and he's not going to do anything for black people. And they basically tried to use this meeting as an example of that and to perpetuate that argument. So what I'm going to do is just start off with some of the things that these civil rights leaders emphasized during this particular meeting. First of all, you had several civil rights leaders there. You had you know, Marc Morial from Urban League. You had Derek Johnson from the NAACP. You had Sherilyn Ifill from NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. You had Kristen Clarke from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and a couple of other people. Vanita Gupta from the Leadership Conference, and one other woman, I can't remember her name, and also Al Sharpton, you can't forget him, you know, from the National Action Network. So you had all these people, each one of them made a brief statement before President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris spoke, and they basically were making various demands of the president-elect, asking him to address various issues. One of the biggest issues that they were calling for to be addressed is voting rights. Kristen Clarke basically emphasized the fact that you had all this voter suppression that went on during the election. She talked about the need to restore the Voting Rights Act. She talked about a robust need to defend voting rights in this country. So that was one of the things that was emphasized. Another thing that was emphasized was these appointments that Joe Biden is making. They emphasized the need to have diversity in these appointments. And one of the things that they emphasized was judicial appointments. And they talked about diversity not only in terms of race, but also in terms of just background, you know, because a lot of these judges that are appointed are former prosecutors. And one of the things that Sherilyn Ifill emphasized is the need to have people appointed as judges who have a civil rights background or who are former public defenders. So that was something that was very important. It was emphasized. This issue of police brutality and racial profiling was also emphasized during this discussion. Sherilyn Ifill mentioned the fact that we need to pass the George Floyd Act. She also talked about the prospect of Joe Biden using Title VI of the not the Voting Rights Act, but the Civil Rights Act to take away funding from police departments who engage in systemic racism and police brutality. That particular provision of the Civil Rights Act basically says that if a government institution is engaging in discrimination, they can lose federal funding. And she was basically saying that perhaps, you know, Joe Biden can use that provision to take away funding, federal funding from police departments that engage in discriminatory practices and policies. So that was something that was very important. It was emphasized during this particular discussion. Uh, Sherilyn Ifill, again, she's the president of the Legal Defense Fund. She also talked about the need to create a national database uh, to deal with police who have been charged with misconduct, so that we can track them and understand, the background of these people that are being hired around the country, because you have situations where somebody commits all these acts of misconduct, and then they're rehired by other departments because they weren't aware of that history of misconduct. So you also had people talking about, the need to restore voting rights for ex-offenders. You had some of the people talking about the need to have someone that's focused on equity, racial equity, a special position where somebody is designated with the job of addressing racial equity in this country. And there were other demands that they placed before Joe Biden. And, that's just a quick summary of some of the things. Again, I encourage you all to watch the particular video. They talked about the need to deal with wealth disparities. That was something that came up during the discussions. So it was a very important meeting, and these leaders put forth very important ideas and a very aggressive civil rights agenda. So I have to, salute those leaders for meeting with the president-elect and making demands of him. Because these elections are not just about electing somebody and sitting back and waiting for them to do everything. It's about applying pressure to them and holding them accountable. It's about setting an agenda and demanding that they adhere to that agenda. So that's a summary of some of the things that they brought to the table. And, this rebuts this whole argument that black people don't present any kind of agenda to these elected officials. This is a prime example of black people presenting an agenda. And, Joe Biden also talked about his plan, his Lift Every Voice plan that addresses some of the issues that were raised. So in response to this, Joe Biden has several things to say, and people have completely distorted what he has said, took little snippets of what he said, and tried to make it seem as if he said that he wasn't going to do anything for black people, which is a complete lie, and that's what I plan to address in this video. The first thing is Joe Biden, first of all, he had a defensive posture, and this is going to be an objective video, so I'm going to talk about the positives and the negatives of this meeting. First, he had a defensive posture. So he was basically, he came across as if he felt like they were challenging him or challenging his civil rights record and all that kind of stuff. So he was a little bit defensive. And, a lot of the things that he was saying, some of the things that he said were self-centered. So he was basically saying stuff like, I've done more than anybody else has on these civil rights issues, things like that. And he was talking about how he was never shy about speaking out on issues. And before he went into that part of it, he talked about like all the things that he's challenging with respect to what Donald Trump has done. He's addressed challenging white supremacists and all that kind of stuff. One thing that he said he was the only white boy who did X, Y, and Z about civil rights, and I thought that was a little offensive to use that kind of language. So that's the problem that I had. Like, part of it was like he had a defensive posture, and also he had limited time. Like, he was pressed for time towards the end, because like after everybody spoke, it was like 40 minutes left where he provided his response. So that's the only criticism that I have. He seemed defensive and his tone was off. Like, he could have had a different tone during this debate. I mean, not debate, but actual discussion. So he said this. He said, he told the civil rights leaders that he's on the same page with them. He's on the same page with them. Does that sound like somebody that's saying they're not going to do anything for black people, or they're not going to do anything to address the concerns of civil rights leaders? He also talked about the need to close the wealth gap. You know, he talked about how he's going to work to do that. He talked about the need to address the needs of, you know, farmers, black farmers, and all that kind of stuff. He talked about his record. Like, he talked about how he has extended, you know, for the past 25 years when he was you know, in Congress, he extended the Voting Rights Act for 25 years. He also talked about how he supports same-day voter registration. He talked about how he supports automatic restoral of voting rights. That doesn't sound like somebody who's talking about they're not doing anything for black people. He talked about no prison for drug offenders, you know, for people that are addicted to drugs. You know, he talked about rehab, you know, drug rehab as an alternative to incarceration. He talked about the need to get rid of mandatory minimums. He talked about police reform, how he supports police reform, and how he supports the idea of appointing someone to the to be attorney general or to other positions that have a pro-civil rights background. And he also talked about like the minority, you know, black appointments to these high positions in his administration. He addressed that. The appointments of many African Americans, that's something that he raised during this particular discussion. So he emphasized like how diverse he is when it comes to hiring and all that kind of stuff. He also talked about how he took on racism in this particular campaign, like how he boldly criticized the racism that was coming from Trump and his administration. And he went on to talk about how we need to make progress on, you know, racial equity. Because if we don't, the country is doomed. So that doesn't sound like somebody who's saying that they're not going to do anything for black people. And I did a prior video where I addressed the issue of you know, the statements that he made about defunding the police, and I'll post a link to that particular video because it comes from this same meeting. So even though he doesn't support, you know, calls for defunding the police and all that kind of stuff, he supports police reform, and that's something that he emphasized throughout this meeting, how he supports police reform and how he's taken various measures to address police reform. And in that particular, you know, meeting, Al Sharpton, you know, talked about like how he met with the families of victims of police brutality, George Floyd's family, his daughter, and all that kind of stuff. And he talked about holding him accountable, making sure that he fulfills the promises that he made to those families and stuff. So again, this doesn't sound like somebody that is not going to do anything for black people. Another thing that he emphasized was this: he wants to have continuing meetings with these civil rights leaders. So unlike what this guy was saying, this black conservative perspective guy was saying, he's open to meetings. You know, he's willing to, you know, this guy said, well, Joe Biden didn't seem like he was willing to listen. If he wasn't willing to listen, would he have a meeting that lasted for an hour and 40 minutes with these civil rights leaders? Would he talk about, you know, keeping things open so that he can continue to meet with them throughout, you know, his administration? Would he say those kind of things if he wasn't about doing anything for the black community, or if he, you know, wasn't interested in listening to people? So, you know, these people that are saying that Joe Biden said that he wasn't going to do anything for black people have just distorted completely what he said, and they just took little snippets and remixed them and made them into whatever they wanted it to be. Joe Biden, you know, when he talking about this issue of police brutality, this is basically what Joe Biden said. He said well, maybe we shouldn't, aggressively pursue that right now until after these elections that are taking place in Georgia, where you have two Senate seats at stake. Because he talked about how they have distorted the message of Joe Biden and made it seem, and I'm talking about Republicans, the Trump administration, the Trump campaign. They distorted things to make it seem as if Donald Trump supports the defund the police movement and all that kind of stuff, which he doesn't support and all that kind of stuff. Again, I encourage you to check out the video that I did about Democrats and defunding the police. I'll post a link in the cards when I get a chance. But he was talking about how, the Republicans would exploit that kind of rhetoric right leading up to this election for in Georgia, where two Senate seats are at stake. And that's very important because the makeup of the Senate is going to decide what Joe Biden can actually accomplish and do. If he has more Democrats in the Senate, then he can actually push through a lot of these ideas that we want to see happen, a lot of these reforms that we want to see, a lot of the agenda that affects black people. So this is crucial. So he was basically saying, well, we should hold off on the talk of police reform until after that election in Georgia, and then we can push hard. And he talked about how he's going to set up commissions to deal with these issues, how he's going to push for all these police reforms. So that doesn't sound like somebody who's not willing to listen. That doesn't sound like somebody who's not willing to meet with people and stuff like that. And then he stated his position about defund the police. And I will, again, I encourage you to watch that video. I'm not going to rehash the points that I made about that particular issue. He said this: I promise you that police reform will occur. That doesn't sound like somebody who's not going to do anything for black people. He talked about this is a part of an ongoing conversation. So this is not it. That one meeting that they had is not it. And this person, this conservative black conservative perspective dude, was basically trying to suggest that Donald Trump was more open to meeting with black people than Joe Biden. And that's absolutely absurd because I don't recall Donald Trump meeting with any of these civil rights organizations. I don't recall Donald Trump meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus. The only black people he meets with are hand-picked Negroes who are beholden to him, who have pledged their allegiance to him and stuff like that, who are not going to hold him accountable, who are only going to make it look like he cares about the plight of black people. That's the only kind of people he will listen to. Stepping, fetching, coon type Negroes. That's who he surrounds himself by. He would rather meet with an entertainer than to meet with, black elected officials or black leaders of black civil rights organizations that represent thousands of people. So you got to take these people, these black conservatives and these so-called woke people who are nothing but low-key Donald Trump supporters and, right-wing nuts just like these Republicans. You got to take them, what they say, with a grain of salt. So again, he said that this is the ongoing conversation, meaning that that's not it, that he's still interested in, dialogue with these leaders. He wants to help set up, a lot of the things that they want to do. He said this, he said, I support what you have been pushing me to do. He supports, tracking of racial equity and stuff like that. He talked about how he wants to make sure that the vaccine for COVID-19 is distributed in a racially equitable way. And, he talked about like the appointments again, how a lot of them are African Americans and all that kind of stuff. One issue that he was pressed on was this appointment of Vilsack, to some. I think he's Secretary of Agriculture or something like that, um, because of his problematic dealings with a black woman, firing her for some statements that she made, uh, and all that kind of stuff. And I can't remember the sister's name, Sherrod something. So don't. Yeah, sorry about that. That I can't get her name, but I'll post it in the description box when I get a chance. So all of those statements, basically, here's the bottom line. All those statements completely debunk this lie that Joe Biden said he's not going to do anything for black people. Another thing that I want to address is this whole thing about Hispanics. And people are making it seem like Joe Biden doesn't care nothing about black people and that he's focused on Hispanics because he made a statement about how uh, basically, America is no longer going to be a predominantly white country. It's going to be a predominantly majority minority type of country, and that a lot of Hispanics are going to be a part of that, and that Hispanics outnumber black people. And he basically said that black people should work with Hispanics and stuff. And um, the fact of the matter is that's true. I mean, in terms of the numbers, there are more Hispanics than African Americans, and absolutely we should work with Hispanics and form coalitions, not only with Hispanics but all different types of people, white liberals, Asians, Hispanics. We should form coalitions, and there are plenty of people that are really about the work that are doing just that, that are forming these coalitions to make things happen. Because people who are really about change, like in terms of enacting laws that will make a difference in our lives, they understand the need for coalitions. These people with this narrow-minded, uh, tribal type of mentality, where they go it alone mentality, and where they reject coalitions. Those types of people, most of those people are not about the work. Most of those people are about the talk and about entertaining folks. They're not trying to pass any laws. They're not staging or organizing any kind of demonstrations or nothing. All these people do is run their mouth and collect money here on YouTube. So I can't take those people seriously. So coalitions are important. Now his tone, like his tone in terms of saying, "Well, you all need to work with people." I think that was condescending because most of those organizations that he met with have all kinds of coalitions with Latino people and work with Latino organizations all the time. So that was a little bit condescending, uh, and just it wasn't called for. Like I don't think that was the best thing to say. So yeah, so that's my thought about that. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to respond to that a couple of people, a couple of these guys said in these videos. So one thing that this guy, Black Conservative Perspective, said is that somehow people think that racial issues would automatically be solved once Donald Trump lost the election and once Joe Biden became president. Nobody that's about the work believes that. Nobody that voted for Joe Biden thought that automatically everything was going to be solved in this country. Because the fact of the matter is, millions upon millions of people voted for that racist Donald Trump. So those people that voted for this guy aren't going to disappear. They're not disappearing overnight. And the problems of racism, which has been at the inception of the formation of this country, is not going to be solved completely within 4 years. But some things will be substantially changed with this Joe Biden administration, especially if we apply pressure on him. I mean, at least we don't have somebody in the White House that openly supports and panders to white supremacists. That's a start. So that's what I have to say about that. Um, this other thing, this guy was suggesting that Trump was more willing to work with black people, and that's nonsense because Donald Trump um, didn't work with black organizations, real black organizations again. He worked with these coons that don't represent anybody but themselves. Another thing that I want to address is this whole thing about leadership. Like people are saying, well, these so-called black leaders, these so-called civil rights leaders. The fact of the matter is, these are those people that Biden met with are in fact civil rights leaders. They are leaders of civil rights organizations, and they are black leaders because they represent thousands of people. Um, if you just go by the NAACP president, the board of directors, the members are elected by, the members of the board of directors are elected by members. Those members of the board of directors select the president and CEO of the organization. That organization has bylaws, they have resolutions that get passed that state what their position is, so they have a clear agenda that's established. So when the president of the NAACP speaks, he doesn't speak as some individual like one of these clowns on YouTube. He speaks for thousands of people that he is held accountable to. The same is true for these other people, some of these other people like Marc, Morial, and others. With respect to, Legal Defense Fund, that's an organization of lawyers that bring civil rights cases that impact the country. The same is true for the Lawyers Committee. So these people represent the black community. Are they the only black leaders? Of course not. You have elected officials that are literally elected by black communities to represent black people. Uh, so those are my thoughts. I think that those leaders are actual leaders as opposed to these people on YouTube who are nothing but entertainers. Um, so with that, those are my comments about that meeting. Again, I'll post links to the videos that I'm responding to, and also I will post a link to the actual meeting so that you can listen to it for yourself and tell me what you think after you listen to it. So with that, peace and blessings. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings. Have a great day.